Welcome back, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for session 3 of today's Landmark CIO Virtual Summit. As many of you know, today's summit was supposed to be held in New York City. Generally speaking, we had about 300 or 400 people registered, and turns out that's not a good idea right now. So as a result, I think very much in keeping with the theme of our CIO Summit for today, as well as our CIO Summit last year, this concept of digital evolution is something that we are embracing ourselves, and we've moved to the online sphere to do it. For those of you who missed our earlier sessions, first session was actually focused on one aspect of business transformation through strategic innovation, being how to move to an on-demand organization and really kind of the accelerated evolution and revolution of the on-demand enterprise, which I think we've all seen happen very quickly as we move from now kind of being in office work to also being work from home. And ultimately, frankly, at day 60 of all this, I think it's closer to being a live from work moment. For session 2, we focused really on security and how to actually achieve a proactive program in times of crisis. Certainly, while all of us are shifting and having chaos and kind of change, that's always an opportunity for attackers. And so I had a fantastic panel really focused on what are some of those best practices and ways that organizations are doing their best to adapt and really kind of drive an active security program, even when it's kind of easy to be reactive. And that brings us to our third session today, which is really focused on intelligence and within there, becoming a data-driven enterprise, becoming a smart enterprise, driving towards kind of that next iteration, and how do we evolve as organizations to be successful. I know normally a day like this, you know, I think we'd say, hey, welcome back. We're all going to have cocktails soon. Maybe some of you already are having cocktails. It's hard for me to know because you're out in the audience and I can't see you, which certainly is a bummer for me. And for those of you who missed the first couple of sessions, I know it's a bummer that you missed some of our jokes. I think my favorite joke so far of all of this shelter in place, and there's been many, but they've all been inside jokes. But I'm sure. So now I think maybe we can move into our third session, and in order to do so, I'm going to go ahead and welcome our panelists up to the table, the virtual table, if you will. I'd like to welcome Steve Mills and Dieter Schuller, and we can kind of jump in and do some introductions and then start the conversation. But first of all, I'd like to really thank and welcome you guys to here. I'd also like to thank all of our friends in the audience. I'd like to thank all of our sponsors for making today possible, Radiant Logic, as well as Norwest Venture Partners, Soaring Eagle, many others. This will be a bit of an extended session, and so I think we'll have a good conversation here to start from a panel perspective. But then we're going to move into kind of a couple of very interesting aspects, both from a overall TED Talk kind of series, and then really into a fireside chat to conclude. But within this topic, I think maybe we can start by talking a little bit about becoming a data-driven enterprise and what that means to you. So as a starting point, I'll ask maybe Dieter, if you want to introduce yourself, and can you give us a little bit of a sense of what does it mean to become a data-driven enterprise to you?
Sure. I'm Dieter Schuller. I'm the Vice President of Business Development at Radiant Logic. We have spent the last 20 years trying to help our customers become more data-driven, primarily in the context of security, but also in the context of digital transformation and customer experience. And there are tremendous opportunities because there's a wealth of information scattered across the enterprise. And if we could just effectively harness that and act on it, we could increase revenue, we could reduce costs, we could create more amazing experiences for our constituents, we could cross-sell better, we could upsell better, we could convert leads to revenue better, et cetera, right? But there are a tremendous number of challenges, and I think if we look at those at a high level, we can learn from them and we can also learn from history. So what are the challenges? First of all, the data is in silos, it's scattered all over the place. Second of all, there's multiple authoritative sources for the same data. Third of all, it means the data means different things to different people. It's not available when you need it, and it's not available in the way that you need it. If you want a good real life example of that, go look at, go find a person in your organization and ask who their manager is. You go to HR, you get one answer. You go to the project management team, you get another answer. Sometimes HR is the hiring manager, but they're not the actual manager. Right? That information gets spread across many different places, and you forget to update it. Right? Do that same thing for transaction history, and you start to see where the problem lies. So if you look at history, you can start to learn from that. Think back to 1999 when we were all trying to solve the year 2000 problem. And what we tried to do, right? It was the advent of data dictionaries and repositories. And the idea there was that if we're going to find all the places where we have a 2-digit date, we need to understand not just the data, but the data about the data, right? And if we do that, then we can start to solve not only these problems, but also integrate the data and make it more effectively usable. But we learned that it was hard enough to just manage the data. It was even harder to manage the data about the data, so we stopped. And then people started to master data and do customer data integration or master data management, and that helped. They built data warehouses and data lakes, but what they found is that oftentimes that's aggregating the data and not necessarily getting down to the actual reference data. And when you ask a question, you get the answer back in a day or even a half an hour, it's okay. But when you have somebody at your digital doorstep and you need to treat them effectively, you need it in milliseconds. And so you need to take advantage of things like, or understand things like data lineage, data pedigree. And if you do that effectively, and you have something that can connect all these different valuable sources of data, understand the data model, create a common data model, and then deliver that in real time in the way that the system wants to consume it, you have the possibility to do amazing things.
Sure, and I think that's a really great in-depth answer, and I'll pass to you, Steve. I guess maybe if you could introduce yourself, and I'd say even just at bubbling it up, kind of at the level of what does it mean for you to be a data-driven enterprise?
Sure, and Dieter, some great insights there. My name's Steve Mills. I'm the CIO for iHeartMedia, and if you guys aren't familiar with iHeartMedia, you may be familiar with the iHeartRadio brand. But a decade or so ago, we were Clear Channel, and the core of our offering in our company really still is that we own almost 1,000 radio stations in 158 cities across the country. And if you hold that up against everybody else pretty much that's in broadcast radio, it puts us in the unique position of being the only major radio broadcast company that can sell advertising on a national audience basis. We still touch 93% of Americans 12 and over on a monthly basis, and that's 200 and something million people. And a growing piece of that is listenership through the iHeartRadio app, which initially was targeted to or focused on delivering broadcast radio through mobile devices, so that if you're from DC and you want to listen to DC 101, you got a way to do that. But it's become broader than that as we've gone into podcasting and some of the other related areas that are also audio based, because we see ourselves more as an audio company, less as a radio company these days. But I would say data-driven enterprise really applies in 3 big ways to iHeart, in my opinion. And one of them is advertising. If we're going to sell audiences, advertisers and agencies have been trained now that they get to see who sees and hears ads. And that's pretty tough to pull off with traditional broadcast radio. You sort of, fire off a shotgun blast out into the ether, but you don't really know who heard an ad or who heard your broadcast, other than what Nielsen tells you periodically based upon people wearing pager-like devices and that sort of thing. iHeartRadio as an app changes all that for us. And more than 10% of our listenership now is done through the app. And the cool thing about that is that's a pretty big statistical sample. Like if you think of 10% of 290 million people, you really got something. And that allows us to take that data and extrapolate. And for people that use the iHeartRadio app, we have lots and lots of information that we can use as sort of our own panel, which is way, way better than any data we can buy anywhere. And beyond the things we know about people and being able to target and segment and make statements about audiences, we also get a lot of data about what people do on their mobile devices and how they listen to music and when they turn the volume up and when they add something to a playlist or fast forward through a song they don't like or that sort of thing. So that's one big component for us. A second big component is the programming side of things, where we've had sort of throughout the history of the company, and it's a long history. I should mention we have a radio station in San Antonio that'll be 100 years old 2 years from now, WOAI. So, this isn't a new business. We've been around a while, and there's a lot of muscle memory in the way things happen. And programming is part of our secret sauce. And having people that can listen to a band and say, hey, wow, these guys are going to be a hit, and bring them up through the ranks and feature them on our stations is kind of magical and not a thing that software is great at. But there's a lot of stuff software is good at. And using software tools as a way, as a force multiplier almost for our best programmers turns out to be a really good thing to do. And it lets those guys focus on what they're best at, and let software kind of do some of the heavy lifting and bring some repeatability as well and some analytics to what goes on in the programming side of the world. And then the third thing is we have a lot of people at iHeart, or a lot of roles, I would say, that have traditionally been really manually intensive and based upon opinion and experience and the way individuals feel about things. Things like ad placement. There's lots and lots of manual activity, and data can be used as a force multiplier there as well to make people more effective at what they do and to reduce the amount of just arms and legs manual effort that goes into this 100-year-old industry, and to modernize it and bring it into the future. So those are probably the three big areas that I would point at.
So if I kind of crunch that down, I think, for you, and for both of you, really talking about, I'll call it, it means becoming a more revenue efficient company. It means becoming more attuned towards, kind of the opportunities in front of you and a better service to your customers. And I think even kind of laying on top of that, it's about driving that digital evolution that you have as a company, which I always love the iHeart story for a couple of reasons. And Steve, how long have you been there now?
About 5 years.
About 5 years. So,
yeah.
And I'm not sure exactly when it happened, but it's a great example, at least for me, of one of those acquisitions. It's a little bit of the tail wagging the dog. Clear Channel's this, beast of an organization, been around, owns radio for forever, and buys this, tiny little app and then rebrands the entire company to be around that app, right? And then now rolls with that from an evolution perspective. And it's really kind of a case of changing identity, which I think is great from a digital evolution perspective as well. Were you there for that when that happened?
I came in shortly thereafter, but it reminds me a lot, and it did at the time, of what happened at Rackspace when we started, when we made a couple key acquisitions that were very small startups that evolved into the Rackspace cloud and eventually transformed the whole company from the inside out. And I would say it's a fair comparison in my mind. And iHeartRadio, which was originally an acquisition we did of a company called Thumbplay, if you remember those guys back in the day, it has become the catalyst for change. And I would say one thing it's caused me to do, at least, is to think about what iHeart really is as a company. And what is it that makes us different? And how do we think about ourselves against Spotify, Pandora, even SiriusXM? And to me, it kind of boils down to three things that are unique to us and hard to replicate. And one of them is the iHeart brand, which my boss, Bob Pittman, sort of built from scratch 6 or 7 years ago. And it started with iHeartRadio, but iHeart is a great consumer brand, even though we don't sell anything but T-shirts and concert tickets. And by the way, all my kids want our T-shirts. It's the first company I've ever worked for that my kids want the T-shirts. But the brand is a cool thing. And then I think a second cool thing is we're local. Like, we're really local in 158 cities. And this may not mean anything to you if you're not from San Antonio, but we know it's Blanco Road. It's not Blanco Road, it's Blanco Road. And in Austin, it's not Route 1, it's Mopac. And that sort of locality gives you the credibility to participate in the community and to be a credible source for news and information and entertainment and those sorts of things. And then the third big thing for us really is talent and what my boss would describe as companionship. The person that rides in the empty passenger seat in your car, Elvis Duran, right? In the morning, or Breakfast Club, or Charlemagne, or Big Boy out in LA, or even Sean Hannity. And if you think about those three things, none of them have anything to do with AM or FM transmission of a signal, right? And as long as we can protect and feed those things, which are all really difficult to replicate, then AM and FM just become ways that we deliver our content to those that want to listen to it. And the internet's another way, and it could be on demand, push, pull, podcast, broadcast, however you want to sort of label the product. It's really built around those three core things that we think differentiate us. And I think iHeartRadio has been a catalyst for us sort of understanding that about ourselves and defining our strategy based on those three things.
Well, and I got to imagine people's, morning commute has changed to actually getting in their car in some places and just walking into the living room instead, right? So, does that change the kind of pattern of behavior and the kind of listening pattern and everything else? And it sounds like that's another aspect of what you're kind of paying attention to, which I want to get back to that in a moment, but maybe I'll pass to you, Dieter, because I think there's an interesting context, and maybe for those who don't know exactly what Radiant Logic does. I think
Max, so walk behind me, I'm on camera.
Fair enough. So I think what might be really helpful, maybe if you can give like a real quick, just kind of positioning so that I understand where Radiant Logic fits. But I'd be curious to understand as well if you're seeing, even with customers, core components or advancing changes that are really driving the value of things like machine learning with customers, or what's kind of the major trend you're seeing right now?
Yeah, so to give you a little bit of background, Radiant is a data integration layer, and we focus primarily, at least initially, on identity data, because it all starts with identity. And if you think about understanding your customer, as an example, it starts with, all right, who is this person? How many different ways do I interact with this person? How many different ways do I know them? And are they identified in my world? And how can I make it so that I make that experience much better for them, right? So the typical first place that we see some of this opportunity is just in the world of security and making it a seamless experience. So you look at most organizations that have lots of legacy and they start to say, well, why are we asking our customers to log in multiple times? Why are we asking them to register multiple times? Why are we offering them stuff that is not relevant because we know over here that they've told us that other stuff is relevant? And the list goes on and on. So if you have an ability to start with understanding and correlating the identity, then you can start to look at all of the behavior and transactional data, right, that is related to that reference data and leverage it much more effectively. And now, right, you can go to better customer experience, you can go to predictive analytics, you can go to all kinds of things that wasn't there before you because you just didn't have access to the data in the right way at the right time.
So, and I wonder, and Steve, in your organization, are you seeing kind of advanced technologies? Is machine learning all it's cracked up to be? Are you guys leveraging it? Is there a value towards it? What are you kind of experiencing with some of the modern techniques that are happening?
Yeah, it's useful. It's got its place. The thing you get into with pure machine learning is you sort of trade off the ability to manage complexity with sort of an inability to explain how you arrive at your conclusions, right? Like that's kind of the trade-off. And so I think in areas where the answer is more important than how you arrived at it, machine learning is really a pretty good tool. And we use it quite a bit in sentiment analysis and looking at playlists and how songs become popular and those sorts of things, which is kind of a nonlinear thing. Like you can't write an algebra equation with a bunch of pluses and minuses and exponents and stuff that explain how a song's going to become popular. But if you've got a black box that'll tell you, hey, this song is behaving in the way that others did that became popular, that's still useful. Like you don't have to sort of necessarily show your math on that kind of stuff, right? But I would say we're doing more applied knowledge work. Probably that's maybe more impactful to us to be able to encode rules in a way that you can
qualify what that means. Applied knowledge.
Well, I would say if you can write down rules and you can have a rules engine that can filter out 80% of the work. And I'll take again the placement of ads as a great example because
Sure.
There are a bunch of rules that go into how you arrange ads in a radio ad break. Like you don't necessarily want like a one car manufacturer's ad back to back with another or that sort of thing. And those are rules that you can write down and people don't have to remember them, and software can go and do that stuff and let people deal with the exceptions. And that's turned out to be a really powerful idea for us. That's, the shorter you can make the long tail almost, right? And the more rules you can write down that software can apply, then the more effective your people become. And that's been really effective for us.
So, and I want to open up questions from the audience here in just a moment. So for those who are listening in, you can actually submit questions through the Q&A function in the software here. But I have a separate question before that. And I think, maybe kind of in a lot of ways, this is maybe the really, $1 million question. Where and how will you leverage data within your organization to actually facilitate and contribute to the renewal phase? We all know that, this is not going to last forever. We all know that at some point, shelter in place, at some point, there will be a net new normal that emerges. I mean, I think we're experiencing aspects of it right now, frankly. Whether it's work from home that becomes extended, whether it's, the way the workplace in general gets created. How are you going to plan to use data in the future to actually shape what the next iteration of the organization is in a post-COVID world? Dieter?
So there's two things that are happening to us that, whether we want to or not, we're going to have to deal with. One is everyone has to work from home. And that means that we have to give people access to things from home that we might not have ordinarily done. Right? So that changes the need for data incredibly. Right? The other thing, if you look at our constituents that we interact with, our customers, our partners, our vendors, right? We have to now, almost by force, digitally interact with them, whereas before we didn't necessarily have to move that fast. Right? So that increases the need for more data. Those are the two requirements that I think, if done right, can turn into big opportunities, even when this is over.
Sure. Steve?
I think what return to work looks like needs to be data driven, because one of the things that's been interesting to me about the last 7 weeks or so is how many things we've done that I think people would have said in January were impossible, in terms of spreading out work and sending people home and those sorts of things. We're doing live local radio broadcasts, drive time stuff. And again, I think if I'd asked in January, I'd have been told people have to do that from the studio, but guess what? They don't. And so to me, in a certain way, shame on us if we don't find the best practices in all of this that we should continue to use going forward. And I think data is going to tell the tale, because we should be looking at efficiency and effectiveness as a way to determine what does back to work mean. And I don't necessarily have a goal that by some date later in 2020 or 2021, everybody's back at their desk working the way they were before, because I think that's a massive missed opportunity. And it is clear that there's lots of stuff that we thought had to happen in person and it doesn't. And the clear obvious case is travel and expense money, and people really have to get on a plane and fly around and that kind of stuff, right? But I think even beyond that, we're finding that we don't necessarily need as much tech support in every location as we thought we did, because people can kind of fend for themselves. And I've really been leaning hard into
as you thought you did, frankly, right? Real estate itself might not necessarily be easy.
Totally. And after people, probably our biggest cost is real estate. We're in the real estate business in a big way in 158 cities. And there are lots of things that I think we should be rethinking. And I think data should be the way that we rethink those things. And we should be objective about what's working and what's not, and what we really have to do. And can we find urban legend and dispel it in favor of the things that really make sense for the business going forward? There should be, if we play this right, there should be lots of efficiencies that we found over the last 7 weeks that can be leveraged for the future.
Sure. So, and a couple of questions coming in, I guess maybe I'll go with the first one. How do you measure the effectiveness of your data program inside of an organization? What's kind of that, I'll call it metadata level, right? How do you know you've got good data? How do you keep the KPIs? What's that measure that you've got? And Steve, maybe I'll start with you.
I think it depends on, it's kind of use case specific, right? What popped into my head when I heard the question was programming, which again is sort of the golden goose around here. It's the secret sauce. It's the thing that I sort of tamper with at my peril in a certain way. But I think the standard for how effective our data usage is in that world is, can we do things that humans are good at? Can we benchmark ourselves against actual metrics and show that indeed the data we're using and the software we're using can keep up with people for the easy tasks? And again, I come back to, if you can take the easy tasks away, it gives those folks, our best programmers, more time to focus on the real secret sauce and those sorts of things. But I think there are also ways to build into your data platforms objective measures of data quality. Like there are things that you can learn about your data in terms of averages and variance and nulls and sort of basic blocking and tackling stuff. And I think you can bake more and more of that into the platform, which we've done, so that you can sort of infer from patterns you find in the data that matches up to data that's known to be clean, whether data has problems or doesn't, and whether it requires your attention or not. And I think the platforms you use have to take on more and more of those capabilities over time, and not just sort of leave people that load the data the task of figuring out if their data is clean or not.
And so I guess maybe to layer on top of that, and Dieter, a question for you. If I think of, the security aspects of this, right? There's, I think, obviously a double-edged sword that exists between collecting data on customers, enabling lots of data to make decisions. There's chances for that data to be manipulated. There's chances for that data also to be exposed and leaked. What are the balance between, I'll call it that, objective of using data to become more efficient, to be more revenue driven, to all the goals that we kind of isolated at the beginning, and then leveraging kind of, that same balance on cybersecurity side? Like, how do you actually achieve those types of measures? And even maybe layering on top of that, thinking about things like zero trust and thinking about things that, maybe 90 days ago, perhaps meant something completely different. What's been your experience as you're talking with customers and kind of your position on it?
So the fact that digital transformation and security are conflicting is a myth. I would argue that the better job you do with security, the more the customer experience doesn't really understand that there's even anything there behind it doing security. So, people right now are logging in with passwords. It's archaic, it's painful. People forget them, they have too many of them, right? If I can start to know more about the user, including their IP address that they normally come in with, their behavior, right? The more I do that, the less I have to even put a password prompt in front of them. If I can just put one password prompt in front of them, even that makes life a lot better. And that's all about understanding the data and knowing that John Smith over here is the same as Jay Smith over here, and he's got two different accounts with me, and I can kind of shield him from that complexity. So if you do this right, you can have much tighter security. And the fact that you have much tighter security and the fact that you've looked at identity holistically and made that part of your program and part of your project makes it that much easier for any business initiative that you want to do, because now you're not creating a project within a project. You've already got that infrastructure in place, and you can rely on the data.
Makes sense. Steve, anything quick to add on that?
Well, I like what Dieter said at the beginning. I think if you're thinking about security as a separate thing, you probably already blew it. And one of the things we're doing is we build out cloud apps and we think about automation and kind of the future of iHeart. We're following principles within a framework that we're calling secure by design. And the intent is that from the time a thing is a twinkle in our eye before we start writing code, we're thinking about, from a basic principles perspective, how are we going to ensure that we protect that data? And I'm sure a lot of folks on this call are dealing with CCPA and GDPR and all the other four-letter acronyms to come. And those are sort of painful, but like COVID, like the forced march to work from home that COVID has pushed us to do, I think they also create a higher level of discipline that's really a good thing. And if you think about security and privacy as you're creating your databases and as you're writing your applications, and you build into them the notion of zero trust and of everything needing to be treated as if it's important, which it is, then I think you're in a way better place than if you come back later and try to make security into something that you've already built.
Yep, I agree with that entirely. So final question, and I guess maybe I'll frame this kind of interestingly. I think, if I look at the Great Depression, I look at, a lot of the kind of previous different epochs, sometimes weird behaviors emerge, weird stories. Like I remember, my mom telling me things about how they would literally, darn their socks and, reuse paper bags and reuse, we do a lot of this today, but more so to the point of, there are all these penny pinching things that happen. What do you think are going to be those weird stories? What are you going to tell your grandkids or your great grandchildren about, this time, 10, 15, 20 years from now? What do you think is that weird story, that weird behavior, that one thing you'll kind of pick back up on? Dieter?
I don't know if I know that yet. I think the biggest thing that I've seen is, the whole idea of working from home kind of blurs the lines between when am I working and when am I, at home being a dad.
Yeah.
And so
we like to call that, instead of work from home, it is live from work.
Live from work, exactly.
Steve, anything weird story or something you think you'll tell your
Well,
grandkids?
I think the whole face mask culture is really interesting, especially in Texas. It's a super friendly place. And I noticed when this thing became real, right, which I think was March 17th was when our mayor issued the stay-at-home order. And then it was another week or two before the face mask became a thing. But I noticed right away how polite everybody was everywhere, right? At the store, in traffic. And not that, I mean, Texans are polite anyway until they get behind the wheel and then something happens. But it was funny to me how polite and gracious everyone was and that sort of thing. But another weird thing to me is the handshake. And I wonder if our grandchildren aren't going to be sort of wide-eyed and saying, you mean you guys used to actually stick a hand out and the other person would grab it? Like,
Yep.
I don't know if that's coming back. I also think there's this sort of freedom in the air now that things are loosening up, and this feels to me like a long haul. Like I think that's kind of a false
sense of
in all of
security.
this. So,
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think I'll probably tell my grandkids about the time the toilet paper became currency in
oh
the US.
wow, yeah, toilet paper. That's a really good one. And even,
well,
I mean, on the cleaning aisles here in Texas, in San Antonio, in the grocery stores, there were things like oven cleaner that were sold out, and I was like, what are people doing with that?
or my favorite is all the hand sanitizer was bought, but the soap's sitting right there, fully stocked.
Yeah,
Like, really?
yeah,
Right?
totally. There's no pattern to it. It's just the things people hoard. And I'll confess, for me, it was coffee. I went to Starbucks, went through the drive-thru, and I bought them out of Sumatra.
Well, who knows what the data will tell us about what happened here and what our grandkids will learn about. But I want to thank you both very much for taking time to join the panel, share your perspectives today. Really appreciate it. And I look forward to what the next iteration of the data-driven enterprise brings.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
a lot.
Good. So I think what we're going to do now is as we move to the next iteration of our session, we will kind of shift a little bit. Obviously, as the global economy has shifted and adapts, I think there's a lot of impact. There's been a lot of disruption. There's been everything from the way that people buy things. I think more people are becoming accustomed to buying online than they once were. Obviously, retail stores kind of shut down, supply chains, people getting sick in factories, the aspects of social distancing, even the things that we just talked about, the consumerism around toilet paper and face masks. I think what I'm really excited to actually now kind of transition us to is to really introduce Rama Shakar, who's a partner at Norwest Venture Partners. And we've asked him to come and provide a little bit of a TED Talk for you, specifically focused on the state of the startup landscape from a VC perspective. Rama?
All right. Thank you, Anthony. And it's great to meet everyone virtually. By the way, I think I'll be telling my grandkids about this quarantine mustache that probably only will be sticking around for a couple of weeks if my wife has anything to say about it. But anyway, it's been fun trying to live out my Tom Selleck impersonation while it lasts. But this is a short presentation, so I won't slide you all to death. I just wanted to share some perspectives on how we as a VC firm are looking at the new normal in 2020. There we go. So let me just do a quick intro on myself. I've been a partner at Norwest Venture Partners for 11 years. I'm from New Jersey originally, so don't hold that against me. But I live in California now, and Norwest, I'll tell you a little bit about, and then we'll get into a little bit about what I'm excited about in terms of investment sectors and themes this year. We're one of the oldest venture firms out there. We're investing out of a $2 billion fund right now. We have about $10 billion under management, all told. So, we're an international firm. We've got offices in India, Israel, as well as our headquarters here in California. And a large part of what we do to try to add value to our companies is partnering with organizations like Landmark to kind of introduce our companies to CIOs like yourselves and get your input, not only to sell you stuff, but frankly, to get input on, where we should be investing, where you're seeing gaps in the market from a technology perspective. So that's a big part of what we do. And, I think there's a lot of VC firms out there, but we pride ourselves in our operational experience. I was at Cisco prior to this, building routers, switches, firewalls, those types of things, and come from an engineering background prior to coming to Norwest. So A couple of our, a little bit of our bragware, we were involved in Uber and Spotify on the consumer side, FireEye and Rackspace, which I'll talk a little bit more about on the next slide. But the point of this really is that, we've actually seen these types of downturns before as a firm. Going back before my time at the firm, we invested in PeopleSoft. I was talking earlier to Steve about our investment in Rackspace because he was there several years ago. Our investment in Lending Club, and the thing all these have in common is that our initial investment in each of these companies was made right after or during recessions. So we're trying to take the same attitude now in this COVID era that we did in the past, which is let's stick to our guns. We're investing for 5 to 7 or even 5 to 7 year or even longer term horizon, and stick to our investment theses, because really our investments today in startups are uncorrelated from public market volatility that you see out in the market. So we want to stay calm and stay optimistic. We're open for business. We're investing as we speak in companies in a different way. We're not able to meet those companies and shake their hands, but we're doing everything virtually, just like I'm sure you are handling your business. So let me move quickly into 3 areas that are on my mind this year, and why I think they've got especially, they're especially relevant in this COVID era. The first is a new one that, productivity, measuring and understanding productivity in this new work from home culture. Look, I think work from home is here to stay in some ways, in some permanent ways, right? Even if we all go back to the office, there's going to be a lot more remote work. We've all, it's opened our eyes into how productive we can actually be. So, I think there's some downfalls of this, though. I think the number of tools that our employees, your employees are using out there is just, there's just an absolute sprawl in terms of the SaaS subscription licenses that most CIOs are faced with. So I'm thinking about startups, technology companies that can help you fix that license management problem, shine a flashlight on all the applications that my employees are using, akin to like shadow IT, if you're familiar with that. But here, instead of in the security context, it's more around, hey, what am I spending all this money on? And is there shelfware out there, unused licenses, wrong tiers? And so you're really well prepared when the Box or Zoom or Slack sales rep comes to you for a renewal. And I think this is really unlocking a new category of analytics. And, it's akin to like a Google Analytics, but it's not for Google, it's for you, the CIO, to figure out what is my employee using, how often are they using it? And license management is one pillar of that. But the next pillar is more around how do I actually measure the benefit I'm getting from these applications? Like, what is the digital footprint of my best performing department? And what can I do to kind of overlay that on my maybe worst performing or lagging departments? So, Blue Jeans is a portfolio company of ours that announced an acquisition, announced that they were acquired recently. They've obviously been a recipient, of a lot of the tailwind that this COVID, work from home trend has impacted all of us. And Productive is a new company that you might not have heard of that's actually doing a great job in terms of shining that flashlight I was talking about on all the licenses that you're using, and then actually showing you which features, down to the feature level, which features your employees are using, whether it comes to Zoom and Slack or Teams. If you have one group arguing we should use Teams versus Slack, it gives you data that actually shows you where's the usage in your organization, so you can actually be more data-driven in your decisions. The next trend, cybersecurity, we talked a lot about this today. I think what's new here, Agari, one of our portfolio companies, announced a report that phishing is up 3,000% since February. Yeah, so the bad guys are jumping on every opportunity to take advantage of people's quest for knowledge and information in this environment. And I only see that getting worse. So I think the move to cloud is obviously exacerbating that. And we're looking for more companies that are looking out for solutions to the phishing and ransomware problem. I do think that word sprawl I used on the previous slide around SaaS apps is also happening in the security space. We're partly to blame for that, funding all these startups in the security space. So I think the pendulum has swung, and I'm actually looking, for a lot more on this, what I call flight to simplicity. We've got to make security easier to consume for customers. whether that means the tools themselves being self-serve and easy to use, or MSSPs or other ways to kind of offload the labor and solve the labor shortage problem that happens that's happening in security right now. And AI, I think really is no longer a buzzword, right? If your security vendors aren't using AI under the hood in a real way, I think you should move on from them. I think that there's a real, the AI is a table stakes ingredient now for building a cybersecurity company. So that remains a really interesting focus area for us. And last but not least, we talked about this in the previous panel as well, data, and I call it data and AI-driven enterprise, right? And what I mean by that is I think the first phase, my observation is that most CIOs started buying software with AI in it, like I was just talking about. Security companies is a great example. But I think what this is evolving into is AI in the enterprise, meaning how do you put the AI into your own apps, into your own workflow, into your own automation. And I think just like we saw CI/CD revolutionize the way that we push software once or twice a day instead of once or twice a year, I think we'll see that more and more with AI and companies. Algorithmia is one that we've invested in that's helping you essentially build like a GitHub for your models. How do I version them, control them, share them, secure them? And I think a lot of tools like that will emerge to help customers more easily consume AI. And it comes back to data. I think AI is useless without data. It's a key ingredient. And I think we're looking as venture capitalists and all the data prep and data normalization and data readiness that has to happen before you can even get to putting AI into your applications. And Dremio is a great example of a company doing that. Last but not least, someone's got to monitor all this data and keep track of it, and we're looking at new ways have emerged to do that. And an example of that is Influx Data, who's the company behind InfluxDB, which is an open source time series database. A different way to organize your data in a time series manner to kind of notice patterns over time. So these are some of the areas I'm excited about. I think to recap, I think we're open for business at Norwest. I think we want to be investing into this cycle. We don't know how long this is going to take to get back to normal, but we do think that, like prior downturns, innovation can really help. And in the areas of productivity, cybersecurity, and data and AI, we're really excited to keep making new investments.
Thank you very much, Rama. Really appreciate it. And I think everyone's always wondering kind of where that VC crystal ball gets shinier and what actually happens. But I think the most important news is to stay calm and carry on in many ways, right? So
That's right.
Thank you very much for joining, and really appreciate your participating. I think, ultimately, as we kind of go through a lot of the challenges of today and in moving towards a more evolved and as digital evolution continues to drive the really agenda for organizations moving through this crisis. One of the most important topics that I think has come up lately is also thinking about what our talent workforce looks like and what the composition of our organization looks like. We've addressed some of those key issues really in terms of what I'll call the on-demand workforce, and certainly in terms of security, and also in terms of data and where all of those things contribute. And now I'd like to welcome our final panel discussion for the day, the conclusion to our session here. And I'm very excited to bring on our panelists. We have joining us Rajesh Anandan, who is the co-founder and CEO of Ultranauts, as well as Nicole from Ultranauts, who will be able to participate and share really in the concept and conversation around neurodiversity as a competitive advantage. So before we jump in, I think maybe just to kind of set the stage a little bit, one of the more interesting topics from my perspective right now, and certainly very happy to be the conclusion of today, I look at thinking about and kind of having the conversation in the context of maybe we can talk a little bit about what is neurodiversity to start, and then we can talk a little bit about where those types of things play out. And so maybe as a starting point, I'll ask Rajesh and Nicole if you could introduce yourselves and maybe give us a little bit of an inkling. What is neurodiversity and what does it mean to you and your organization? Rajesh, you want to start?
Sure. Nicole, do you want to introduce yourself and then I'll go? Yeah, sure, absolutely. So my name is Nicole Radziwill. I noticed that, Anthony, you didn't say that last name, probably a good thing.
I didn't want to butcher it, and even worse, I know you don't have your camera on, and unfortunately Nicole's camera's broken, so we all apologize, but I certainly didn't want to see the face that you would make, so that's the only saving grace of not you being able to see me butcher it. So
That's funny. Well, anyway, so, as it said on that slide, I'm the Senior VP of Quality and Strategy at Ultranauts. We're an onshore quality engineering firm, and we have neurodiverse teams, which we'll hear about quite a bit in the next 15, 20 minutes. About me, for the past 25 years, I've been leading data science, data management, and what we now call digital transformation initiatives, and was also a tenured university professor. I taught quality management and mathematical modeling and applied machine learning for nearly a decade. So now all of that stuff is kind of converging and becoming really useful for helping us drive value from these new technologies and the data in our companies right now. So at Ultranauts, I'm helping to drive the next phase of our growth. I'm leading development of new services and capabilities, and also guiding strategic competency development. So we do software test automation, and we do quality controls for data and decision making around data. Both things that are pretty germane to this audience. So Rajesh?
Sure, thanks, Nicole. So Nicole's always the smartest one in the room. I won't waste anyone's time with my bio, other than I'm one of the founders and CEO at Ultranauts, and my co-founder Art Scheckman and I started the company to demonstrate that neurodiverse teams could deliver a competitive commercial advantage. We're 7 years in. We've been growing at 50+% a year while maintaining a customer NPS of 100. And as Nicole said, we provide a full range of quality engineering services spanning data, analytics, software, digital experiences, working with a range of Fortune 5 and startup clients, AIG, Berkshire Hathaway, Bank of New York Mellon, Comcast, Warner Media, Slack, and so on. What's interesting now is that 7 years ago, we built the world's first fully distributed, fully remote workplace for neurodiverse talent. So operationally, when the current crisis hit, literally nothing changed. But obviously, it's very different to work from home now, surrounded by fear and panic, and having kids at home. And it's that's not a fair test of working from home for any of you who are trying this for the first time. It can be much better. But along the way, we built a fully distributed team. We have teammates working in 20 states across the US. So we're very spread out, all onshore here in the US. And 3/4 of our entire organization is on the autism spectrum. And I would say all of us, the entire organization, believe fundamentally that our differences as individuals make us better together. And we hope we can convince you of that over the next few minutes. And to Anthony's question around neurodiversity, it simply frames autism, dyslexia, and other cognitive differences as naturally occurring variations in the human brain, not as disorders, just differences. And that framing allows us to focus on actual kind of abilities and strengths that we all bring to the table as individuals, and not be distracted by sort of perceived disabilities of one group or another.
And so within that neurodiversity concept, and I think obviously, first of all, there's a lot of challenges, I'd imagine, to trying to create and leverage that as kind of a unique differentiator, and we can come to kind of the competitive advantage component first. But I guess maybe in that same kind of question, what is the competitive advantage? Why is neurodiversity an advantage for an organization to adopt? And if there are people out there thinking of building out that neurodiverse workforce, what are those components what is the reason they should do that?
So one of the, oh, sorry, Rajesh.
No. Well, so I'll give the small answer, and you can give the big answer. From a limited lens of what we've been able to accomplish as an organization, we've demonstrated in measurable terms, and in some cases dramatic terms, that we can fundamentally deliver better results. We won a large engagement away from Capgemini for an AIG business unit, where they were building a kind of insurance underwriting platform. And we spun up a team that built a massively scalable API test automation solution that increase test coverage by 100x, not 100%, 100x. And you can
Wow.
imagine that that had dramatic results, and cut down the sort of cycle time, the regression cycle time, from like weeks to, minutes. In another case, we replaced an IBM team at a Prudential business unit doing some fairly technical kind of compliance checks and validation. And again, using automated tools and sort of intelligent human judgment, we were able to improve quality, again, in measurable terms, by 56%. So I only say that to say, it's one thing to claim we're better, but we've been able to prove it in measurable terms. And I think we're showing that there is indeed an advantage and a commercial advantage to having neurodiverse teams, but it goes much broader than that. Nicole?
So one of the things that's really well established in the management literature, both theoretically and empirically, is that divergent thinking contributes to success and innovation. And that includes a divergence in backgrounds and cultures and in the expertise of the teams that you put together to get things done. But what we're also introducing is that includes the cognitive diversity of your workforce and your team. So some of the things that have been associated with having these cognitively diverse teams is, number one, your rate of improvement changes. So say you want to shift a group of processes to achieve greater goals in efficiency or effectiveness. Having those cognitively diverse teams can help in that. Cognitive diversity has been positively associated with success in transformation efforts, which we know are pretty critical because 70 to 80% of them fail, both lean transformation and digital transformations. One of the things that I think is most interesting, though, is that there's also been research that says, the convergence of mental models, everyone being literally on the same page in the terms of, how they conceptualize a problem and how they understand the textures of a problem. In order for those mental models to emerge, teams have to surface information from these cognitively diverse people, and they have to integrate those different perspectives together. So, actively managing that information integration and that process of surfacing is the thing that helps make neurodiverse teams very productive and achieve those goals. And the interesting thing is that this is one of those things that Ultranauts has spent quite a long time tuning. How do you manage that information surfacing process? How do you manage the integration? And so it's those sorts of things that help you get over barriers like compensating for those cultural and communication differences that emerge when you do have those diverse teams.
Yeah, and I guess, I don't want to oversimplify or sum it up, but I think, the idea that complex problems require lots of attention from lots of different viewpoints, regardless of whether that's, socioeconomical or that's, cultural, or frankly, I think obviously at the cognitive level or at the neurodiverse level, those types of differences really help us solve those problems faster, more effectively. And I think that's where you're seeing some of those outcomes, Rajesh, the things that you're seeing in terms of QA development and being able to provide better quality engineering across the board, whether it's, software, it's experience, it's data, et cetera. I'd be curious, so obviously, and you guys have been around for, I think it's been about 6 or 7 years.
Yep.
So within that journey, then, I have to imagine there have been some challenges to overcome. There probably are some lessons learned. There are probably things that you've both, kind of looked at as opportunities and crisis. I love the example of everybody working from home and, you guys already being ahead of the curve when that happened. But I guess what would be the tangible and practical things that either of you would share as, I'll call it, lessons to those in the audience who might be thinking about creating a neurodiverse program? What are the practical kind of maybe even anecdotal examples of tips and tricks or pitfalls to avoid?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll let my autistic colleague go first to share from her lived experience of what this really means, and then I can add on some.
Please, Nicole.
So there's basically 2 questions here. One of them is, what do you need to address? What do you need to confront in order to get this right as far as, developing and integrating a neurodiverse workforce? But before I get there, I just wanted to affirm that you already have a neurodiverse workforce. Chances are autistic people like me are working for you. And chances are also pretty high that you haven't fully integrated them. And so as a result, you might be missing out on their contributions because, we just recently did a survey among our workforce that said, why are you here? Why not some other company that's, a non-neurodiverse majority company? And there were three things that came up. One of them is that we need to have control of our sensory environment. So, particularly for me, fluorescent lights, I can only be under them for, about an hour before I started to get cold-like symptoms. It's bizarre. It's definitely not ordinary. So number one, be in control of that sensory environment, the light and the sound and the seat that you're on. The second thing that people needed was they needed an environment where straightforward communication and limited or no office politics was a value, where people strive to do that. And in fact, one of the things that our people have expressed is useful is that, and maybe this is because work from home is one of the defaults, but written communication is the default. We capture as much as we can in writing so that we can, filter out where the issues are, where the discrepancies are in communications. And the third one is empathetic managers. So, managers who understand that you're human with a complex life and that work is part of that complex life. So, really what we need is not much different than what everybody else needs. And in fact, when you create an environment that addresses those things, everyone benefits from it. One of the stereotypes that's pretty pervasive is that autistic people have social and communication issues. But I like to refer to one of my favorite quotes by a guy named William White, who published in Fortune in 1950. He said, "The greatest enemy of communication is the illusion of it." And I think that a lot of companies, even now, because there's not such a tight focus on understanding processes and communicating and writing and making sure all of the whys are understood. What we're finding is that working from home is kind of exacerbating all of these process problems that you can smooth over when you have people doing those micro corrections day by day, face to face in the office. So piece of advice number one is just understand that these are differences. Give us the benefit of the doubt. When you don't assume intentions, when there's a conflict and you ask like, hey, why is this going on? That helps both parties or multiple parties gain understanding of each other. As far as creating a neurodiverse workforce in your own organization, what are some of the things that you can do? One of them is embed some neurodiverse people in your organization, so we can spread the culture. Obviously that's one way to do it. But there's a couple of other things, and I think it boils down to three things. Number one, we're addicted to being in a flow state. Those flow states where you really get deeply into your work, and this is why it looks like we zone out a lot. But flow states are also associated with extreme productivity. I mean, this goes back in the psychology literature for 3 decades now. So what can you do to help your employees get into that flow state? What barriers can you remove? That's number one. Number two is, what can you do to create a climate of psychological safety where it's okay to be you and express things? And then the third thing is give people the benefit of the doubt. Everyone, I mean, I have, well, maybe in one case over the past 25 years, run into people who really don't want to do their best. Everybody wants to do their best. Everyone wants to make a contribution and add value. So, take that as the baseline and approach all conflicts and issues with that in mind, that everyone genuinely wants to do their best.
And if I could add some sort of very maybe tactical hints. One is try to hire objectively. Throughout the interview, there's a ton of research that points to a ridiculously low correlation between a subjective interview assessment and on-the-job performance. R-squared of 0.01, right? Like it's useless. And so instead of letting your biases take in and essentially relying on a ineffective tool, find other ways to observe or assess the actual skills you need to do the job.
Well, and actually, Rajesh, just even in that, because there's a question from the audience that I think actually plays into that. You know, somebody had asked, one of the major frustrations kind of in the higher ed space is obviously things like standardized testing. Like, how do you get that objective test level? Have you guys developed something explicitly that helps with that process, or identifying particular individuals and really kind of separating out some of the subjective from the objective effectively?
Yeah, so there's two dimensions to that question, I think. One is, how do you understand sort of expertise or knowledge? How do you validate knowledge? And that's more around an approach we're taking in terms of our internal training and upskilling. I mean, we're a learning organization, right? Where whatever we're working on today and the tools and skills we're using are we're assuming they're going to be out of date in 12 months. And so we have to have a continuous learning engine. But I'll answer a different question, which is, how do we assess candidates? Like, how do we know what someone can do? And we take a very simple approach, which is, instead of trying to pattern match the past, which has proven to not work. So like, there's a ridiculously low correlation between years of work experience in other organizations and actual on-the-job performance in your organization. Those things are not the same. And so in our case, we don't rely on experience. We try to look, sort of understand aptitude. So we'll dissect every role into a set of attributes we think contribute to success in that role. And those will be a combination of cognitive, let's say, abilities and strengths, behavior traits, and then of course, knowledge or skills. And then we'll construct a recruiting process to validate as objectively as we can each of those things. It turns out the skills or knowledge are easy to validate. You can construct tests or assessments, there's stuff off the shelf. Behaviors are harder, but equally important in terms of how you perform on a team, right? Coachability, can you take feedback? Learning agility, can you learn new stuff? And so as part of our process, we're able to hire incredibly capable talent who maybe don't have experience because they just haven't had a fair shot before, but actually objectively assess for those things we're looking for, to the point where we have a 95% degree of success that we found the right person who's not going to be just good at their job, but great at it, and be able to, within months, be at a skill level where we're able to go up against kind of large consultancies with decades of experience and blow them out of the water. And I think the hiring aside, the two other things I would say is, if you're starting on this endeavor, you need what you're really trying to do is change your own practices and norms and systems, because and I've worked in many places, most of our organizational practices, our business practices, are not optimal. They create a bunch of friction. They're inconvenient. They're leaving people's contributions off the table. It's just, if you're serious about diversity and neurodiversity, you've got to tackle those things that seem like little annoyances, but actually become usually a huge impediment, and it takes real leadership. We work with some of the clients we were at Bank of New York Mellon, Sri Atluri, who's the global head of quality engineering there, believes that there's real potential in neurodiversity, and he's a transformation guy, so he's not afraid to just change processes, change systems, because at the end of it, we're applying universal design principles to the workplace. So ultimately, it's just going to be better for everyone. And then obviously hire us if you have quality engineering to do. And really, and I say that half jokingly, but it's always helpful to see firsthand the value that a neurodiverse team can bring.
And I think it's also, you've done the hard work around how to recruit the talent, how to actually, screen the talent, train the talent, retain the talent. I think last I had, I remembered it was a 95% retention rate across staff, which is incredible for any organization, honestly. We're just about out of time. I think maybe I'll ask the same kind of question that I asked this morning, just to kind of close, which is, what's that one thing you're going to do when shelter in place is lifted? What's that one, major thing that you're really looking forward to? Nicole?
I'm pretty happy sitting in my house at my dining room table 24 hours a day.
Fair enough.
I'm sure there's something.
What about you, Rajesh?
I'm going to go to every neighborhood restaurant on the block. I'm in New York City, and it's just a very different place right now. And I think we're all hoping for a day when the city can get back on our feet and support each other.
Sure. Well, excellent. Thank you very much both, Nicole, Rajesh, for joining. Appreciate it. To all those in the audience, if you do have QA needs, by all means, talk with them around what they're doing. And also, if you're thinking about setting up a neurodiverse program or looking at kind of neurodiversity within your own respective organizations, they've been living this life and have been through the process of architecting it and doing a fantastic job. So by all means, definitely reach out, and certainly I can also help provide introductions as necessary. Thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate it. So now would normally be the point of the kind of overall summit where I would actually say, hey, everyone, come join me. Let's go get a cocktail. Unfortunately, though, we are all at home, so you'll have to get your own respective cocktails on your own time. But I do look forward to the time when we can do this in person, which hopefully will be July 23rd, New York City. I'd like to thank all of our sponsors, all of our partners. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today and along this virtual journey. And I hope that we actually do this even more to come. And frankly, we'll probably even do these things when we can get up and go to these things in person. So thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it. Stay safe, and I look forward to the next time.